Hi, my name is Fred, and I was assistant to Penny O'Connor at the Arts Educational Schools London for 18 years. ArtsEd is a performing arts centre, and it's particularly known for its BA in Musical Theatre School, populating Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals in the West End. But there's also a secondary school and a wonderful BA and MA course in acting for stage and screen. Is that okay? Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so let me introduce to you, without any more ado, Penny O'Connor. Yay! Okay, so here am I, and I'm going to do a little bit of ramble through those 18 years of teaching Alexander Technique at ArtsEd, and I've got lots of bits of paper to help prompt me, and let's see how we go. First of all, maybe the question to ask is, why teach Alexander Technique in a drama school? Well, I've got some notes here, so I shall read off them to see what I wrote. Why is it so essential for training actors? Actors for screen and stage need to be able to focus, relax, engage and connect with their audience and with each other. Learn to be rather than do. Transform into other characters. Eliminate facial, vocal and physical habits that interfere with performance. I'm still working on that. Control performance anxiety, that one too. Create a presence on stage and screen. To know themselves. Alexander Technique, of course, helps with all of this. It's said that to be vulnerable, sexy, intelligent and unpredictable are 4 great qualities of an actor. And Alexander certainly deals with that. But apart from all those official things, if you like, when I was preparing for this, I got the most wonderful message on Facebook from a student that I hadn't seen for many years, since she was at ArtsEd. And it simply said, "I've been thinking of you recently, usually when I'm lying in semi-supine, realizing that what you taught me is pure gold." So what was I teaching her that was pure gold? Well, inhibition, direction, primary control, non-doing, awareness, a unified field of attention, and the procedures: monkey, sliding up and down the wall, crawling, the whispered R, lying in semi-supine. But all of that I attached to things that would help them as an actor, things that would help them as a singer, a dancer. And I would attach it to unusual things to help them remember as well. On one occasion, I was teaching musical theatre students, and it was a day when I decided to work with them on grounding. And it was windy that day, although still sunny, and I decided to take them out for a walk in the park, take it out of the classroom, get them to think of the world coming towards them as they walk down the road. And when we got to the park, I asked them to put their hand on one of the trees there and see if they couldn't feel the roots creaking. Great metaphor for being grounded. To feel the roots of a tree creaking as the whole tree swayed in the wind. And then we came back to class, and they were chattering and excited, except one guy in particular who was sitting back and looking at me like that. And I said, "Okay, any comments, any feedback?" And he says, "I don't know why we were doing that. We're here to learn musical theatre." not hugging trees. And I said to him, Paul, "10 years' time, when we meet again, you're going to look back and think of all the classes that you ever had at Arts Ed, and this one will be the one you remember." Blow me. 10 years later, I did meet him again, walking down the corridor, about to take a dance class. This time he was teaching it. And he turned and saw me and said, "Penny, you were right." Not only did he remember, he understood what the class was about. I think that story about Paul is another demonstration of how we sow seeds for later, and the students don't always know what they're learning at the time. I qualified as an Alexander teacher in '92, but before that I had already done 12 years as a writer and actor in theatre myself, and also done 5 years supply teaching. I was very used to doing group work, and this is what was offered to me at Arts Ed mostly. I can tell you, after dealing with kids who wanted to throw their satchels, bags out of the window and staple your register to the desk, teaching drama students was a doddle. I used a lot of NLP and accelerated learning techniques, also what I'd learned in teaching English as a foreign language. One of the things I remember was that if you teach something with something unusual attached to it, the brain will remember it more. So I can say that I was teaching inhibition, etc., but if I ask students now what they remember of my lessons, they're likely to reply, stepping into cardboard boxes, telling jokes as we were doing some qigong, the magic lemon, dressing up, the travelator, the higher creative self. My model was to get them to experiment and discover things for themselves. I knew what I wanted them to discover, of course, and led them down certain paths to help the discovery. But it was their journey which I was facilitating. So I would also attach it to something very relevant to them. So, for example, I might work with what they were getting up to as they were speaking a Shakespeare monologue. Okay, go off in 2s and 3s and just give yourselves your monologue, speak your monologue, and what I want you to do is notice what they are doing to speak. It's a given that they are great actors. We're not critiquing their acting ability. What you're critiquing is, what you're noticing, observing, becoming aware of, is how they're using themselves. Go and have a look, and come back and we'll discuss it. Well, I wouldn't always do that in a huge group. As they were working in 2s and 3s, I would come round and discuss with them what they were noticing and make suggestions. But let's suppose they all came back to the big group to discuss that, and I'd say, okay, I want you to experiment again. And this time, as you're thinking your monologue, presenting your monologue to each other, I want you to think of the space above you and behind you at the same time. Can you do that? And of course, as I'm telling you now and thinking it, as they were thinking it, they'd come back and up and find their easy balance to then speak. So that was my kind of model, getting them to do things and practice and experiment with each other, so they were learning peer to peer, not just from what I was saying or suggesting. I did have to assess the students, not at the beginning. At the beginning it was more up to me what I was teaching, and I didn't have to present a scheme of work. But as education got more regulated, of course, I had to be able to show my lesson plans, my scheme of work, in fact, put it into a scheme of work that was suggested, and grade the students and assess them. So how did I do that? Well, I used written assignments that they did in the holidays, lying down in semi-supine every day and writing a couple of sides of A4 to let me know what they discovered. With something like that, always I would get them to read their papers out to the rest of the group and get the group not to comment on them, not to do the noddies and, oh yes, yeah, that's fine, but to just receive it very neutrally, so that they weren't sharing in order to entertain, but were sharing from the heart. It took them a while to get to that, and it felt very strange. But it's a wonderful example of inhibition and how listening can just be listening and how we can just be there for other people. The biggest assessment I did was always to video them at the beginning of their course. They would sit and stand, walk to the wall and back, pick something up from a shelf, pick something up from the floor and put it on a high shelf. Then they would speak a line of text and sing a line of song. They did that the first Alexander lesson they ever had. So there was a lot of nerves and their use patterns being displayed. At the end of the course, maybe halfway through the course as well, I'd film them again. And then we would compare the two videos. Very, very powerful. It really helped me assess. I remember one student that I really didn't think had got very much out of it. He'd arrived as a very strong dancer and present kind of person, and I wasn't sure if there was a lot Alexander would be able to offer him. And I don't know who was more amazed, me or him, when at the end, when he went through that sitting, standing, saying a line of text, etc., when we compared the videos, it was astonishing how he'd changed, how he'd really come into himself and created incredible presence. So that was a good learning thing for me too. The other thing that I did that was really excellent for assessments, which also helps the brain, was to ensure that all the students wrote notes down at the end of their class as to what they felt they'd learned or what they'd experienced. It was just 5 minutes and they could just write a few lines, nothing more. They had them then for the next class to refer to, but also at the end of term I'd collect them all in, so they had a whole, and give them, I would collect them in, but first I would give them their whole set of notes, so that when they wrote an assessment form, which they had to do, a self-assessment form, they got all their notes there to write, to read, so they could write, oh yes, actually, I think I've done quite well this term, I appear to have done this, that and the other. And then in that assessment form, I would respond to that. And I also had all their notes to refer to. So I had a really clear idea of how they were progressing and developing. One of my favourite ones, which I did with the MA students, was to get them to do a little end of term, Christmas term showing of small sketches of the principles of Alexander technique. My favourite one that that someone ever did was to present the relationship of the head, neck and back as 3 dancers going higgledy-piggledy. One was the head, one was the neck, one was the back, and the Alexander fairy coming along and sprinkling direction over them, so that they began to dance in tune and in step with each other. So there was a wonderful coordinated dance going on. Wonderful relationship of the head, neck and back. Thank you guys, that was my favourite of all of the ones that I saw. So apart from that, mentoring is the other thing I wanted to share with you. When I first started working with actors, or wanting to work with actors after I'd trained, there wasn't any scheme set up to do that. In fact, I approached a couple of senior teachers who I knew were working with actors, and they weren't offering any apprenticeship schemes or anything like that. So I was quite determined that when I was in their position that I have an open door policy, so anyone who wanted could come in and see how I was teaching and assist me. Normally it was for people who had just finished their training and were in a postgraduate term. And sometimes I'd get a couple or maybe 4 or 5. And as long as they told me they were coming and were fairly consistent in coming, I would give them opportunity to observe me, to remind me where I put my glasses, and also plenty of hands-on work. It was such a good wheeze, because although I was doing quite a lot of group work, I did want them to have hands-on experience, and I'm afraid I don't go around 16 people in an hour or an hour and a half. It just doesn't work. But if there are 6 of us, or just 3 of us, then we can get them to have some hands-on work. Half the group lying down in semi-supine, while the other half is having work in smaller groups. This worked really well. It means for those who were just out of Alexandra School that they had a whole morning of hands-on work, maybe 2 every half hour. Working in twos was excellent practice as well. For the students, they were learning to observe and see in their peer, a bit more peer learning. And I was able to be more attentive to not only the person I was working with, but also the person who was watching. And this is what my assistants also learned to do. The other thing to say is that the actors are very easy to work with, the performing arts. They're already open and eager to learn anything that's going to help them become a great actor and performer on stage. They're very flexible, open, so they tend not to have at that age, and we're talking 18 to 30-year-olds, say, they don't have at that stage so many back problems, etc. And they're easy to move, they're responsive, flexible, and will go and experiment with what you're suggesting. So that was a really good marriage of helping new teachers, helping the students, and getting the Alexandra stuff across. One extra thing I wanted to just mention is to have, it was really important to have very good relations with the other staff. The staff room is absolutely brilliant to discuss the students' progress and to encourage and respect the other students, the other teachers' works, particularly the voice and movement, of course, but also the actors and acting directors. One thing that I used to do once a year was to get all the first years on around mid-February, during the All Falls month, carnival. I would get them to come in all day wearing something that they didn't usually wear, something out of their habit. And it just lifted the whole attention of the whole school, because they would have to wear these different clothes throughout the whole day. And I'd be very particular and get their peers to tell them what they had to wear. So they had to change their image. If they were people that wore a lot of makeup, they weren't allowed to wear makeup. If they were very neat and tidy in their hair, they had to have a bit more grungy look to them. If they never wore purple, then maybe come in that day wearing some purple. We had great fun with that, mostly. And it really transformed people. I remember one woman who always wore black and always wore trousers, and so we asked her to come in maybe with something orange, something very colourful, and a dress maybe, and something flowing. Well, she came in this beautiful orange caftan with enormous hoop earrings. She took her space and sailed in, and she said, wow, I'd never considered that I could look like that. And that was a real discovery for her. Sometimes some of the teachers would also take part, which was a great hoot. I always did. So I'm afraid, out came the sexy dress and high-heeled shoes, or the headmistress look, whichever it was. I would change it from year to year. So it was all great fun, and it became something that the whole school was looking forward to and enjoyed seeing how the students were behaving and how excited they were. So there we go. I think I've gone through most of what I wanted to share with you. So what I'll suggest to you now is that you take some notes for just this last 5 minutes on what you remember of my presentation, what you feel you've learned in the last 5 minutes. And if you don't want to write it down, then you could lie down on semi-supine and just let it go through your head for a few minutes, because that's what will help your brain remember these things. Easy learning. Thanks very much.